You can automate the assembly line, but you can't automate the lungs needed to blow quartz for $1 billion laser. My name is Kenneth Rabinowitz. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 36 years, I have been a master glass blower at what is now called Viridian Optics. The kid didn't look up when I came in. That was the first thing. Not an accident. It was a deliberate, practiced gesture of dominance he must have learned in a seminar. His name was Connor Ashford, and he was 26 years old. He sat behind a slab of white composite that served as a desk, staring at a laptop screen so thin it looked like it might snap. "Kenny," he said, his voice flat. He still hadn't made eye contact. "Have a seat." I didn't. I stood in front of his desk, my work boots looking out of place on the plush gray carpet. The air in his office smelled of lemons and something sharp, like an expensive cleaning product. On the wall behind him, perfectly centered, hung his framed Master of Business Administration degree from Princeton University. It looked like it had been put there yesterday. He finally lifted his eyes. They were pale, uninterested. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, no tie, and a pair of trousers that cost more than my first car. On his feet, I saw a pair of stark white sneakers. Later, my daughter would tell me they were called Common Projects and cost $500. The idea of spending that much money to look like you couldn't be bothered to wear real shoes was a mystery to me. "The company is moving in a new direction, Kenny," he began, reciting from a script only he could see. "We're implementing a full-scale optimization of our fabrication processes. A total digital transformation." Optimization. I'd spent more than 3 decades in this building, and now this kid was optimizing me. "Your role," he continued, glancing at a manila folder on his desk but not opening it, "has been identified as a legacy position. It's incompatible with the new automated fabrication paradigm we're rolling out." I said nothing. I just watched him. He had hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. His face was smooth, unlined by worry or work. He was a creature of theory, a man made of buzzwords. "As such," he concluded, pushing the folder an inch closer to me, "your employment with Viridian Optics is terminated, effective immediately. Human Resources has your paperwork." He looked back at his screen. Dismissed. 36 years of my life, gone in a 60-second monologue. The biggest mistake they made wasn't firing me. It was assuming I'd go quietly. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Back in 1982, I was 18 years old and standing on a pair of yellow footprints at Paris Island. I spent 12 years in the Marine Corps, specializing in avionics. I learned about tolerances. I learned about systems where one loose wire, one microscopic fracture, could send a $30 million aircraft and its pilot into the sea. I learned that there is no substitute for doing a job right, every single time. The Corps taught me discipline. It taught me that some things cannot be rushed, and some standards are absolute. When I got out in 1994, I needed work. My uncle knew a man named Arthur Fine, the founder of a small company called Fine Glassworks. They made specialized lab equipment. Arthur was an old German craftsman, a man who believed the skill in a person's hands was a sacred trust. He was looking for someone with patience and a steady hand. He saw the Marine in me and gave me a chance. He put me in a workshop with a 1,000-degree torch and a block of raw quartz and told me to learn. I spent 2 years as an apprentice. I burned my hands more times than I can count. I learned to feel the heat through the tools. I learned to gauge the viscosity of molten quartz by the way it sagged, the way it glowed. Arthur taught me that glass has a memory. If you heat it too fast or cool it too slow, you introduce stresses that will live inside it forever, invisible until the moment they cause a catastrophic failure. In 2003, Fine Glassworks, now much larger, won its first contract with a Dutch company called ASML. They were building a new kind of machine, something that used extreme ultraviolet light, EUV, to etch circuits onto silicon wafers. The physics were beyond me, but the problem they brought us was not. The light source was incredibly powerful, and it required a series of conduits and lenses made from the purest possible synthetic quartz. The material had to be dimensionally perfect, with a surface so smooth that any flaw would be measured in atoms. And it had to be blown by hand. No machine could do it. The complexity of the internal channels, the way certain sections had to be thicker than others to manage heat dissipation, it required a human touch, an artisan's intuition. It required lungs that could deliver precise, steady pressure for minutes at a time, and hands that knew the language of cooling glass. Arthur was too old by then. The job fell to me. For the next 15 years, I was the guy. I was the one who flew to their headquarters in the Netherlands to develop the prototypes. I worked with their engineers, men with doctorates in physics and materials science. They would show me their computer models, their theoretical designs, and I would tell them what was actually possible. I would sketch a change on a napkin, a gentler curve here, a thicker wall there, and explain that the laws of thermodynamics didn't care about their simulations. They listened, they learned, and together we created the components that made their EUV machines the undisputed pinnacle of semiconductor manufacturing. Each machine sold for over $200 million. They were, and are, the most complex devices ever built by man. And inside every single one of them was a piece of quartz that had been shaped by my breath and my hands. The breaking point came in February 2020. That was when the original Fine family sold the company, now renamed Viridian Optics, to a massive private equity firm. The old culture of craftsmanship was replaced overnight by a culture of cost-cutting and synergy. Arthur Fine's portrait in the lobby was replaced with a generic motivational poster about innovation. They brought in a new CEO, a man who had previously run a chain of yoga studios, and he brought in people like Connor Ashford. Connor was the son of a major investor, a nepotism hire, plain and simple. He was given the title of Director of Fabrication Strategy and a mandate to modernize. His entire understanding of our business came from spreadsheets. He saw my salary, which by then was a respectable $120,000 a year, and saw a red number on a ledger. He saw a man in his late 50s using archaic techniques, and saw an inefficiency. He never once set foot in my workshop. He never asked what I did. He just saw a line item that could be deleted. What he didn't see was the contract. 11 months ago, during a tense renegotiation of the supply agreement, the engineers at ASML had insisted on a specific clause. I remembered the conference call. Our new corporate lawyers were trying to water down the quality assurance requirements. The lead engineer from ASML, a man named Dr. Brandt, cut them off. "Let me be clear," Brandt had said, his voice sharp and precise. "Your company's value to us is embodied in one person. We are not buying from Viridian Optics. We are buying from Kenny Rabinowitz. The materials are commodities. The machinery is standard. The skill is unique." He insisted on an addendum. Article 4, Paragraph 2. It stipulated that every Tier 1 EUV quartz conduit delivered to ASML must be personally fabricated and certified by a master quartz artisan. It then defined that title by name, Kenneth Rabinowitz. It was a poison pill, designed to protect their supply chain from the exact kind of corporate foolishness that was now unfolding. They knew the financiers would never read the technical appendices. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago. I saw Connor's name on a memo about a new, automated quartz fabrication unit being purchased from a supplier in China. A machine that promised to do my job for a fraction of the cost. I knew then it was only a matter of time. He was a child with a new toy, and he was about to learn that some toys come with very sharp edges. A dead calm settled over me as I walked out of Connor's office. The manila folder felt flimsy in my hand. I didn't open it. I knew what it contained. Legal boilerplate, a paltry severance offer, an offer for Cobra health insurance, insults printed on cheap paper. I walked past the cubicle farm. Heads popped up and then quickly ducked back down. They had all heard. The news had already flown through internal chat channels. They were like prairie dogs sensing a hawk. Their silence was its own kind of betrayal, but I didn't blame them. They had mortgages and tuition payments. They were trapped. I was not. My workshop was in a separate building at the back of the campus, a place the executives never visited. It was dusty and smelled of ozone and scorched metal. It was my sanctuary. I slid my keycard over the reader for the last time. The light blinked green, and the lock clicked open. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. In an hour, that card would be a useless piece of plastic. I didn't rush. I moved with the same methodical pace I used when working a difficult piece. First, I went to my locker. I took out my street clothes and hung up my worn, fire-resistant work jacket. It had scorch marks on the sleeves that were like a map of my career. I left it there. It belonged to the company. What belonged to me were my tools. They were in a heavy leather roll on my workbench. I untied the worn laces and spread it open. These were not company property. Most of them I had made myself. A tungsten pick with a handle I'd turned from a piece of old oak. A set of brass calipers my father had given me, polished smooth by decades of use. A pair of graphite paddles, custom shaped for the specific curves of the ASML conduits. Each tool had a story. Each was an extension of my hands. I wiped each one down with a soft cloth and placed it carefully back in its pocket in the roll. This was a ritual of separation. I was taking my knowledge, my experience, my very identity as a craftsman, and packing it away. The company could keep the building and the machinery. They could not keep the part that mattered. While I worked, I could almost hear Connor's voice in my head, dictating an email. Team, thrilled to announce a major step forward in our optimization strategy. We have successfully sunsetted a legacy fabrication process, paving the way for a fully automated, scalable solution. This is a big win for synergy and forward momentum. He probably used a thesaurus to find new ways to say progress. He was celebrating. He was posting on his LinkedIn profile about driving change. The arrogance was breathtaking. He hadn't realized that the legacy process he'd just sunsetted was not a process at all. It was a person. And that person's name was written into the one document that actually mattered more than his MBA, the Master Services Agreement with their only billion-dollar client. I finished packing my tools and walked over to my main workbench. There sat a half-finished piece, a conduit for the fifth of 6 machines currently on the final assembly line. It was still attached to the lathe, a beautiful, complex swirl of clear quartz. It was 90% complete. All it needed was the final shaping of the aperture and the slow, careful annealing process. An hour of my time. I looked at it, cold and lifeless on the bench. Then I looked at the torch assembly, the regulators, the specialized gas mixture I had perfected over years. Without me, it was all just a collection of parts. That piece of quartz, worth more than a new Ferrari to the right people, was now just a very expensive piece of scrap glass. I took one last look around the workshop. I saw the ghost of Arthur Fine, nodding sadly in the corner. I saw the ghost of my younger self, sleeves rolled up, sweating over the flame. 36 years. I walked out, leaving the door unlocked. I didn't need to lock it. There was nothing of value left inside. The trip to human resources was brief. A woman I'd never seen before, who looked barely older than Connor, slid a stack of papers across a table. She recited her own script about exit interviews and final paychecks. I signed nothing. I do not accept the decision, I said, my voice even. She blinked, confused. Her script didn't have a response for that. I'm sorry. The decision is final. Your manager has already... I understand, I said, cutting her off. I pushed the unsigned papers back to her. But I do not accept it. I stood up and walked to the security desk. I placed my keycard on the counter. The guard, a man named Frank I'd known for 20 years, looked at me with pity in his eyes. He knew. Take it easy, Kenny, he mumbled. You too, Frank, I said. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun and didn't look back. I got into my 1984 Chevy El Camino, the engine turning over with a familiar, rumbling cough. The small POWMIA flag I kept on the dash fluttered in the breeze from the open window. I drove away from the place that had been the center of my life for more than 3 decades, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just a profound and chilling sense of clarity. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to step in it. 2 days passed. The first day was quiet. I spent it in my garage, cleaning my tools, organizing my workbench at home. It felt good to have them back where they belonged. My wife, Sarah, watched me with worried eyes. She had seen me give my life to that company. She'd seen the missed dinners, the canceled vacations, the weekends spent at the plant trying to solve some impossible problem. What are you going to do, Ken? She asked that evening. I'm going to let them learn something, I said. The second day, the tremors started. I didn't have to be there to know. I knew their production schedule better than they did. The final assembly team for the 6 new EUV machines would be waiting. These machines were already sold. Intel was the client. The delivery date was contractual, with penalties for every day of delay running into the millions. Around 10 a.m. on that second day, a production manager named Dave would have walked down to the stockroom, looking for the final set of 6 quartz conduits. He would have found only 4. He would have checked the inventory system. It would show 2 more in fabrication. He would have called the fabrication floor. Someone there would have told him the automated unit wasn't operational yet. It was still being calibrated by a technician from Shenzhen who only spoke Mandarin. Panic would have begun to bubble. Dave would have called his boss, the Vice President of Operations. The VP, a man named Henderson, who had survived the corporate takeover by being aggressively useless, would have called Connor Ashford. I can picture the conversation perfectly. Henderson, sweating, trying to explain the problem without sounding like he was blaming the new golden boy. Connor, annoyed, dismissing it as a minor logistical hiccup. Just expedite it, Connor would have said, as if expedite were a magic word that could conjure a master artisan out of thin air. We can't, Henderson would have stammered. It's a manual fabrication. Kenny Rabinowitz was the only one who... The silence on the other end of the line would have been deafening. That would be the first moment that the smooth, confident surface of Connor Ashford's world began to crack. The first hint that a legacy position might have been something more. By 3 p.m., the problem would have reached the CEO. By then, the daily logistics call with Intel would have happened. Intel's people are not forgiving. They are ex-military, ex-engineers, people who live and die by schedules and specifications. They would have asked for a status update on the 6 machines they had already paid a deposit on, a sum close to $300 million. They would have been told there was a slight delay with a key component. They would have asked which component, and when they were told it was the EUV quartz conduit, a red flag would have gone up all the way to their own C-suite. They knew me. Their top engineers had my personal cell number. I knew this because at 3:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a California area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from the CEO of Intel himself, not his assistant. Him. His voice was calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. Kenny, Pat Gelsinger here. I'm hearing some concerning things from Veridian about our order. Things that don't make sense. Give me a call when you get a chance. I think you and I need to talk. I saved the message. That was my ace in the hole. That same evening, I drove my El Camino down to the Jersey shore. I bought a ticket and walked out onto the boardwalk at Point Pleasant. I got a sausage and pepper sandwich and a cold soda. I sat on a bench facing the ocean, watching the waves roll in. The salt air was clean. The sounds of the arcade and the distant screams from the roller coaster were the soundtrack of normal life, a world away from the silent, air-conditioned panic that was undoubtedly gripping the executive wing at Viridian Optics. I was not hiding. I was simply making myself unavailable on their terms. They had taken away my work phone, my email, my access. They had cut the lines of communication. Now, they had to find a new one. My personal phone rang again around 7 p.m. It was a number I did recognize. It was Richard Sterling, the CEO of Viridian, the man who ran yoga studios. I let it ring 4 times, then answered. Hello? Kenny? It's Richard Sterling. Thank God I found you. We have a situation here. His voice was tight, strained. The calm, Zen master persona was gone. He sounded like a man whose house was on fire. Oh, I said, taking a bite of my sandwich. The Intel order. The EUV machines. There's a component issue. Is that right? I said. I could hear the wind whipping around his end of the phone, a high-pitched whistle. He was probably pacing on the roof of the building. Listen, Kenny, there's been a misunderstanding. A serious miscalculation. Connor Ashford acted without full authority. He's been disciplined. Disciplined. Not fired. Not yet. They were still trying to manage the problem without admitting the scale of their incompetence. They were trying to get me back on the cheap. That's a shame, I said. There was a pause. He was waiting for me to offer to help, to ask what I could do. I said nothing. I just listened to the sound of his desperation. We need you to come back, Kenny, he finally said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We need you to finish the last 2 conduits. The Intel shipment is grounded without them. We're looking at contractual penalties of over $50 million, not to mention the damage to the relationship. He was lowballing the number. The penalties were per day, and the real cost was the complete loss of the $1.2 billion order and any future business. He was still treating me like a fool. I don't work for you anymore, Richard, I said calmly. Your man, Connor, made that very clear. He's optimizing. He's implementing a paradigm shift. I'm legacy. That was a mistake, he almost shouted. A catastrophic error. Name your price, Kenny. We'll double your salary. We'll give you a bonus. Just please, come back and finish the work. I finished my sandwich and wiped my hands on a napkin. I looked out at the dark ocean. The lights of the pier glittered on the water. For the first time in 36 years, I held all the cards. I wasn't just an employee they needed. I was the singular solution to a billion-dollar crisis, and I had a direct line to their client's CEO. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. My surrender. It's not about the money, Richard, I said, and I almost believed it. But it was about the money, and the respect the money represented. It was about making them understand, in the only language they truly spoke, what they had thrown away. I'll come back, I said, but not as an employee, and not on your terms. I could hear him exhale, a rush of pure relief. He thought he'd won. Anything, Kenny. Anything you want. I let the silence stretch out, long and uncomfortable. I let him dangle. Then I laid out my terms. There were 3 of them. They were not negotiable. First, I said, my voice as cold and hard as cooled quartz. My compensation will be $2 million a year. There was a choking sound on the other end. $2 million? Kenny, that's more than... Second, I continued, cutting him off. I want a lifetime contract. It will state in clear and unavoidable language that I can only be terminated for gross negligence, as judged by a third-party arbitrator chosen by me. It will also give me full autonomy over the quartz fabrication workshop. Budget, Personnel, equipment, all of it is my call. He was speechless. I could hear his labored breathing. I knew he was doing the math. $2 million a year for, say, another 10 years. $20 million. It was a staggering number. But it was a pittance compared to the $1.2 billion in revenue, plus penalties, that was currently circling the drain. And third, I said, delivering the final blow, Connor Ashford. I want him gone. Not disciplined. Not reassigned. Fired. I want to see him cleaning out his desk when I arrive tomorrow morning. I want his parking space. This was the one he hesitated on. Firing the son of a major investor was a political nightmare. It was admitting to the world that their prized Princeton MBA was a destructive incompetent. Kenny, I don't know if I can do that, he stammered. His father is on the board. That's your choice, I said. But my phone is ringing, Richard, and I'm pretty sure the next call I take will be from Pat Gelsinger. I wonder what he'll do when he finds out his entire next-generation production launch is being held up because you're trying to protect a 26-year-old who doesn't know the difference between a quartz conduit and a coffee cup. I'm sure the phrase breach of contract will come up. I'm sure his lawyers will be very interested in Article 4, Paragraph 2 of your agreement. Checkmate. I had just told him I knew about the clause. I had told him I was talking to his client. I had taken away all his room to maneuver. He was silent for a full 30 seconds. I just listened to the waves. What time will you be here tomorrow? He finally asked, his voice a dead monotone. The fight was gone. He had surrendered. 9 o'clock, I said. Have your lawyers draft the contract. I'll have my own lawyer review it before I touch a single piece of equipment. And Richard? Yes, he said, his voice weary. Make sure the kid's box is packed. I want to see him walking out as I'm walking in. I hung up the phone. I threw my trash in a bin, and for the first time in 2 days, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about a world that had become so obsessed with theoretical value that it had forgotten the worth of real, tangible skill. I had just reminded them. The next morning, I drove the El Camino to work. I pulled into the executive parking lot, right into the spot marked Director of Fabrication Strategy. It was next to the CEO's Tesla. My old Chevy, with its faded paint and POW Maye flag, looked magnificent. I walked into the lobby at exactly 9 a.m. Richard Sterling was there to greet me. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was rumpled. Kenny, he said, forcing a smile. Welcome back. Richard, I nodded. As if on cue, the elevator doors opened. Out walked Connor Ashford. He was carrying a small cardboard box containing a few personal items, a framed photo, a desk plant, and what looked like a stapler. The Princeton MBA was gone from the wall. He was not wearing his $500 sneakers, but a pair of somber dress shoes. He was flanked by 2 security guards, one of them my old friend Frank. Frank gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Connor saw me. His smooth, confident face crumpled. For a second I saw the 26-year-old kid he was. Lost and humiliated. His eyes were filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wings, made of buzzwords and privilege, had melted. He said nothing. He couldn't. He just stared as I walked past him, a ghost from the legacy world he had tried to erase. The door's right there, I thought. He walked through it and was gone. Sterling led me to a conference room. 3 lawyers in dark suits were waiting. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Gable, who I'd called the night before, was already there, a copy of the draft contract in front of her. My client has reviewed your offer, she said, without preamble. We have a few minor adjustments. For the next hour, she dismantled their legalese, tightening clauses, removing loopholes. The lifetime guarantee was made ironclad. My autonomy over the workshop was made absolute. The compensation was locked in, with guaranteed annual cost of living increases. I just sat and listened. They had no power here. They agreed to every change. By 11 a.m., I had signed a contract that made me one of the highest paid non-executives in the entire corporation. I was no longer an employee. I was an asset, a critical piece of infrastructure with a lifetime guarantee. My first act was to walk down to my workshop. My key card, a new one with a higher clearance level, worked perfectly. The door clicked open. Everything was as I had left it. The cold, half-finished quartz conduit was still on the lathe. I took off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and put on a pair of protective goggles. I opened the valves for the oxygen and hydrogen. I struck the flint lighter. The torch roared to life with a familiar, deafening hiss. The flame was a brilliant, pale blue. It was the sound of control. It was the sound of my victory. I picked up a graphite paddle, one of my own tools from my leather roll. I heated the conduit slowly, expertly, bringing it up to temperature. The quartz began to glow, first a dull red, then a bright, molten orange. I brought the torch closer, my hand steady, my focus absolute. The world outside this room, the world of spreadsheets and MBAs and corporate politics, ceased to exist. There was only me, the flame, and the glass. 6 hours later, the two conduits were finished, cooling slowly in the annealing oven. Perfect. I sent a simple text to the VP of Operations. Parts 5 and 6 are ready for pickup. The response came back in less than 10 seconds. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you. That evening, I was home by 6 p.m. It was the first time I'd been home for dinner on a weekday in years. Sarah had made my favorite, pot roast. She looked at me across the table, the worry finally gone from her eyes. So, she said, how was your first day at the new job? It was productive, I said. We didn't talk about the money. Not yet. We just talked. About our daughter's classes at Rutgers. About the leaky faucet I finally had time to fix. About taking a real vacation, maybe to see the Grand Canyon. For the first time in a long time, the future felt spacious and secure. The weight of providing, the constant pressure of being one bad quarter away from obsolescence, was gone. In the end, they didn't just give me my job back. They gave me back the life I had sacrificed for it. Some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. Experience, skill, the institutional memory of a place. Companies run by men like Connor Ashford have forgotten this. They see people as liabilities, as costs to be minimized. They chase buzzwords like optimization and synergy, not understanding that a company is nothing more than a collection of people with specific skills. Take away the right person, and the whole glittering facade can collapse. Authority, he learned, is temporary and granted by a title. Control is permanent and earned through mastery. He had the title. I had the control. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel.